Hello and welcome to another episode of A Day in Film. We are 2 days into this week-long experiment, and I'd say I'm having a pretty good time so far. And it definitely feels like I'm improving on the way I speak and how much I stutter and use filler words like or hey, see, I'm working on it, trust me. Anyway, you saw the title, you know exactly what movie I'm going to be talking about. Before I get into it, a like or a sub, or both, would be massively appreciated. It really does do a lot to help the channel and also helps me want to keep doing these for you guys. And if you sub or like, then you clearly want more. Anyway, with that all out of the way, all the shameless promotion out of the way, today on the 17th of September, which is a Tuesday, of 2024, I watched Underwater. Underwater was a kind of an odd pick for me. I originally, on Tubi, was going to watch Ringu, the original Ring, or the Japanese version of The Ring, and I only really switched it last second because I something about the look of this movie just interested me so much. It's directed by William Eubank, I think is how you say his name, and starring Kristen Stewart. I had no idea what to expect with this movie. The only other horror movie I've seen set underwater was, Leviathan, I want to say, which is just a shameless Alien ripoff that is, I personally still kind of enjoyed it, because I think it's a sort of silly, fun watch, especially when you see just how bad it is compared to Alien, but it's definitely not a standout in the very open genre that is underwater horror. I think it's a seriously underutilized genre, and I'm sure it's for a reason, mainly technical reasons. I'm sure it's incredibly difficult to make a movie like this that's majority underwater. But this movie, I thought, was only good. You know, there are a lot of things in this movie that really work. For a lot of it, or at least for the first maybe 30 minutes, it completely leaves you in the dark on whether it's a horror, like a creature movie, or if it's an environment movie, because an environment movie would work perfectly well with this kind of setup, because just being stuck like 7 miles underwater, even if there's no monster, and like a failing station would be scary. You know, just in this movie especially, they really don't shy away from showing how gruesome even something as simple as like a pressure malfunction can be. You know, people explode in this movie. Happens like at least 3 times. But the movie does, not quickly, but the movie does eventually reveal to you that it's going to be a more standard creature-based underwater movie. And it got me nervous and excited, because I was excited to see the kind of underwater creature design that they would come up with, and to see how they would handle it, and if they would try to explain it, or if they would just keep it strictly scary. But I was also nervous because I know this is a very easy thing to mess up. Going back to Leviathan, that movie is not scary looking, like at all. Like the monster in that movie is kind of horrible looking, not in a cool way, but just like an ugly way. And this movie, visually anyway, reminded me a lot of Prometheus, as weird as it is to say. The more futuristic style of tech with all the flat buttons and screens and stuff, it reminded me a lot of Ridley Scott's visual design. And I was very nervous to see if this movie would just kind of end up aping Alien. Thankfully, it's a lot more wide than that. This movie covers a lot more ground than Alien. With there only being one alien in this movie, there are like at least 100 of those little floating squid monster guys. And speaking on those floating squid monster guys, I have to say I'm not huge on their design. It's going to be a weird comparison, but it kind of looks like the final Leviathan you find in Subnautica, with the pulsing tentacles, I guess you'd call it. I'm just not huge on the design, and with the arms too, it just doesn't feel very scary. It feels a little too human to be really freaked out about, which would normally work, but the way they're used in this movie, it just never really gets me. And speaking on just the way they look, the way the movie looks also is just not my cup of tea. Outside of the like technological design, I think the look of the underwater like setting, and especially when they're in the suits walking around, I think it just looks too muddy and murky to really be interesting. And a lot of the movie is not lit very well. It just looks so like flat and just bland and boring that it's kind of hard to not stay awake, but just kind of hard to keep interest in. You know, it's so just like it's so hard to see, and I know, you know, you're 7 miles under the ocean, you know, you're obviously not gonna have a great view of anything really, but I think they could have lit it a bit better and still had it make sense, if you want to say that. And the movie's pacing, I know it's a jump, but the movie's pacing is insane. It feels, a lot of ways, it feels like a video game where you get like almost a little opening cutscene of normal things, and then you get the rest of the movie kind of unfolding after that. I think I kind of wish they built up to it a little bit more. You know pretty much none of the characters at all, and that's one of the biggest flaws with this movie, is that there's no characterization at all. Outside of TJ Miller's character, which I can't believe I'm about to say this, but he is probably the best thing in the movie. Outside of his character, no one feels really important at all. You get a little bit of like sprinkling of explanation and lore here and there, but outside of that, they all just feel like suits, basically, just walking on the sea floor. And it's a shame, because I really do wish they put a bit more effort into it. But outside of that, I mean, there's not much more to this movie. It never really got to me horror-wise. I think, again, they could have done a lot better with the visual aspects, but for what they did, I think it's okay. I think they definitely should have gone even further in with the like Lovecraftian horror. I wish they introduced the really big guy a little later, or earlier on, I mean. He is the scariest thing in the movie, and finding out that all the little guys are literally living on him is kind of awesome. Definitely needed work on the character development, and the score too. It's shockingly forgettable. Underwater scores are not, I mean, I can't say if they're difficult or not difficult to do, but I think it's very underwhelming in this movie. It feels very generic. This could be happening literally anywhere. But if there's one thing I have to give this movie credit for, it's my urge to watch more isolated horror. In a lot of ways, I mean, not on a quality scale, but this movie is like The Thing, where it's a small group of people completely isolated, like no matter what, or Alien, or Leviathan, and I think that's one of the reasons it's so effective, or so almost effective, I should say. And I mean, just off the top of my head, I really want to watch like Apollo 18 or whatever the movie's called. It's a like found footage astronaut horror movie. Something about the big bulky suits in this movie just looks really cool. And in that aspect, I think it looks pretty good. But there's just too much wrong with this movie to really, really like it. And a lot of the things that I do like about it are strictly visual, which is kind of a shame, but I'm happy I watched it, you know. It gives me hope that, you know, you can do something even better with the underwater setting of a horror movie, because, man, the ocean is scary. Overall, I gave this movie a 6 out of 10, you know, probably a little soft, probably, I could probably drop down to a 5, but I think this movie is good, if for anything, the ending scene, because those last, like, 15 minutes really do wrap up the movie very well. That's all I have to say. If I could tell you whether or not you should watch this movie, I probably would say you shouldn't, just because I don't think it's really worth your time. There are some neat ideas, but there's nothing that like Subnautica hasn't done better, which really does hurt to say, but I mean, the genre of underwater horror or deep sea horror is seriously underexpanded upon in the horror sphere of film. But yeah, that's all I have to say. I hope you enjoyed my even less coherent rambling than normal. Again, I hope you have a wonderful day. Hey guys, while I was walking down the stairs thinking about this movie, I've officially changed my rating to a 5 out of 10. The movie is just okay. This is completely unbiased. I came to this on my own conclusion. It's definitely not a stunner. But yeah, that's all I have to say in this little editor's note. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you in the theaters.